Good afternoon, everyone. It's Whiskey Wednesday, June 3rd. I'm Mark Gillespie in the WhiskyCast studio in Haddonfield, New Jersey. I hope your week has been a good one. It's been an interesting week, shall we say. Before we bring in our guests, Peter Mulryan of Blackwater Distillery in Ireland and Angela D'Orazio of Mackmyra Distillery in Sweden, I wanted to bring you a quick update on the story we led off the podcast with this week. If you heard the episode already, you know that one of the businesses that was damaged in the violence that took place around various peaceful protests in Minneapolis over the last few days as a result of the police custody death of George Floyd was the distillery Du Nord Craft Spirits, which is owned by Chris and Chanel Montana. The distillery was burned early Friday morning, suffered extensive damage. As we reported on this week's show, Chris's colleagues at the American Craft Spirits Association had set up a GoFundMe account for him early in the weekend to try to help him raise some money to help pay his staff and cover expenses until the insurance can make things right for him. Wanted to bring you a quick update on that because that fund is now already at $81,370. They had originally started with a small goal, raised it to $30,000, blew through that, and now their goal is $100,000. But I also wanted to tell you that what Chris and Chanel Montana did was even more touching, because even though their distillery suffered extensive damage, and so did their apartment nearby in the fires that took place Thursday, Friday in Minneapolis, they decided that since insurance would be taking care of them, and they said, we're going to be able to recover from this, but many of our neighbors in the business community may not. So what they did was started what their own fund on GoFundMe, which they are calling, and they're calling it the Du Nord Riot Recovery Fund, and they even acknowledged some irony in that term. But here's what's happened with that fund. They started small as well, trying to raise some money just to help the other businesses around theirs recover. They have already accomplished more than $250,000 in the last few days. They started that fund over the weekend. They've already raised $255,574, not for themselves, but to help their colleagues in the business community in the area around the Minneapolis Police 3rd Precinct station that you may have seen video the other night of, that was overrun by protesters and looters and damaged severely. As I said, Du Nord Craft Spirits was damaged as well. The sprinkler system went off in their building for more than 4.5 hours, dumped thousands of gallons of water all over everything. Fortunately, it kept the spirits from catching fire, but they still had extensive damage that Chris has been trying to clean up ever since. And I do want to emphasize, we did not want to intrude on the recovery process at Du Nord. We have reached out to them by email. Chris and Chanel both have a standing invitation to come on the webcast or on WhiskyCast when they are ready to do so, and would love to talk to them about what they're doing, but we're going to wait until they are ready. I want to go ahead and bring in our guests right now. Before I do, I need to tell you that if you didn't see our updates this afternoon, we had said that Rachel Berry from Ben Riach, Glendronach, and Glenglassaugh distilleries, the Brown-Forman distilleries in Scotland, was going to be one of our panelists today, but got word this afternoon that she was not going to be able to join us after all. We do plan to try to get her on an upcoming webcast at some point here in the near future, and we will keep you posted on that. In the meantime, I want to go ahead and bring in our other guests right now. Peter Mulryan of Blackwater Spirits, or Blackwater Distillery in Ireland near County Cork, and also Angela D'Orazio, the Master Blender and Chief Nose Officer at Mackmyra Distillery in Sweden. How are you both doing today?
Great, thank you. Very good, thank you.
Peter, let's start with you because you released a new whiskey this weekend, Velvet Cap.
We did. Velvet Cap, yeah. We are a distillery based in County Waterford on the Cork-Waterford border. The nearest distillery to us actually is Middleton. So that's the part of the world we're in, the south coast of Ireland, on the River Blackwater, which is about 100 meters just that way. We started making whiskey 18 months ago with our American head distiller, John Wilcox. And the oldest whiskey, or the oldest new make, is now 18 months old. So another 18 months and it will be whiskey. And then we'll release shortly after that. Part of the process of getting things to market was to start playing around with source products. And we started with this brand Retronaut, which we brought out, when was it? It's written on the back somewhere. November, I've forgotten. About 2.5, 3 years ago, when we started building the distillery I'm in now, where we make our whiskey. In fact, if you got a second, I'm in the boardroom. Come with me. Moderns of technology. Just beyond the boardroom door is a gallery space, which we were meant to have opened to tourists, but because of the COVID, we can't until, I'd say, July. And then directly below us is the production floor. As you see, there's two of the
Nice. Please don't trip.
It's wonderful.
That's the distilling area there. And then the brewing area you can't see from here is kind of under that part of the building and back in there. And then next door to me here, through those doors, is the new build. This building I'm in now actually is built in the 1950s. We took it over. It had been vacant for 10 years. It was an ironmonger's, a hardware store. We'd have put a new roof on and do all kinds of stuff to it. But we try to keep the character. I mean, amazing things like a railway used to run through town here, and all the steel uprights in the building are the railway tracks. And if you get close, they're actually embossed. You can't see it. Ireland.
We're having trouble. When you turn the camera away from you, we're having trouble hearing you.
Fair enough. Well, I'm done my tour now. So basically, the distillery itself had to be built from the ground up, even though the main building was already existing. We had to obviously upgrade it, and there's a new building just behind me, which contains offices and all the facilities we need. So pump rooms and steam rooms and clean rooms and courtyards and all that stuff. So that's where we are. So back to your point and your question. Yes, Velvet Cap. We launched this weekend. It's a sourced whiskey, and we say that on the back label, so there's no doubt about it that it's a sourced whiskey. The idea was, about Irish whiskey history, is distilleries didn't bottle their own product. Distilleries made whiskey. In fact, it's still part of our license. Technically, a distillery can't sell directly to the public, even to this day and age. There's one or slight little loopholes they've built in recently so we can sell limited quantities. But until literally last year, it wasn't possible. So a bonder brand, so a bonder would be an importer of spirits or a wholesaler in Ireland, and they would have brought in mostly sherries, ports, and they probably would have had a business bottling Guinness and bottling Jameson. Most of these companies bottled under their own brand. So, for example, Mitchell's in Dublin bottled under the Green Spot brand, and they'd Red Spot and all the different spots. Ubies had Redbreast. Now, they're two bonder brands that were bought back by Idea, by Pernod Ricard. But every big town had one. And our nearest town, which is 20 minutes that way, big town is Dungarvan, a local bonder there. Their brand was Velvet Cap, and it ran into the 60s when the bonder trade in Ireland closed down and the distilleries and the breweries started bottling their own product. So the idea was to delve into the history of the company. If you go to the Blackwater Distillery website, there's a series of 3 blogs over the past 3 weeks where I kind of tell the story very briefly about bonding in Ireland and why we decided to do this and how we did it. So that's, in a nutshell, that's where this comes from.
And where is it available right now? Just in Ireland, or will you be sending it out to other markets?
Yeah, it's just Ireland at the moment. Literally released last Sunday. The first shipment was last week. It's currently available. It is available worldwide via irishmalt.com. It's an online platform, and it's available now in shops all around the southeast and as far as Dublin. And by the end of the month, it'll be all over the country. And then from there, we'll try to just, because of COVID and because of whatever else, we'll kind of keep an eye on Ireland this year. We look at a small bit of export then in 2021, and then we'll try to build it from 2021 onwards. So this for us is kind of a dry run on the process, because we've our own bottling line, we've our own facilities in-house where we bottle, we label, because we also have a very large gin business, which kind of cash flows everything. So whiskey for us now is obviously the end game, and this is a way to get us there.
Okay. So, Angela, what are you up to these days? I hear tell you've been doing some stuff with green tea.
Yes, that's true. That's not. Hi, everyone. I would say it's not the product that has the latest product, because the latest product is the Catch 22 in Sweden called Moment 22. But that has been caught in a Catch 22 by COVID, so it hasn't been released in Sweden, but it has been released on our webpage. So let's see if I have it here, my little cupboard. So this is the Moment 22, Moment 22, Catch 22, as its name would be in English, and it's a rebottled whiskey, actually. So for those of you who followed us when we started in the last century, we started making whiskey in 99, in the end of 99, on a small scale though, and then we had a full-scale distillery starting in 2002. And we made the Preludium series. Mark, you remember that? I'm sure of that. And we released some pretty young whiskey. It was between 3 and 5 years of age, Preludium 1 to 6. And some of it was sold at the Monopoly stores in Sweden, and some of it outside of Sweden. But we made more than that that we didn't manage to sell. Obviously, it was a very young whiskey, so we had it in our warehouse, and at a certain point we decided to do something with it. So we poured it back in our small, the small 30-liter casks that we have in Sweden that we sell a lot of here to the private customers. So we made 27 30-liter Swedish oak casks, and we poured all those remaining bottles of the Preludiums from 1 to 6 into those, mixed it all together, and then we had it there for 3.5 years, and this is the result. So it's a weird it's a weird story, but it's so now instead of being 3.5 to 5 year old, it's around 8-year-old, you would say, or 8, 9.
And Whiskey Canuck says he should add a magic whiskey locker to his office. That's a great way to store whiskey back there. Are you in your office right now, or at your
No. I'm at home. This is my this is a kitchen thing. We bought it at a vintage store here in Stockholm, and it was just, I think it's an old medicine cupboard that the lady who had that store, she kind of painted it and put them in her own kitchen. So I saw that. I was like, wow, that's cool.
So we saw you sipping on something, Angela. What are you drinking?
Well, this is water, to be honest. But I have my green tea here. If I want to have a sip of that, I have another glass here. So I just wanted to warm up with water.
Okay, well, let's talk about and Peter, what's in your glass right now? I'm assuming a velvet cap?
I just finished it's a gin and tonic. It's an RTD we make. It's one of our brands.
Okay.
just finished it. But I'm going to move on now to the velvet cap in a minute. I have my glass here, good to go.
And just for the record, even though today's been a really stormy day and it started out pretty hot, and it's one of those days where you normally would like a cold beer, keep in mind on these webcasts, I always try to stay neutral and not play any favorites. So I've got a blend, the Dewar's Double 32-year-old that is matured. It had finished off 4-stage aging, finished in PX sherry casks. So I'm finishing off my sample of that one. But I wanted to, because we had a question about this from Silverlock Whiskey Club for you, Angela. Grante, your green tea one, is it going to be available in the U.S.? I seriously doubt it, since I don't think any of your expressions are available here right now, right?
Well, just the simple answer, just like that, is no. But we do have a distributor, a Swedish, I think, descendants who have a company in Florida, who are importing Swedish oak and the Swedish oak bottling and Brooks. So I hope, I'm not sure though, because I haven't heard from them in a while, but I'm not their contact. But anyway, so I hope that they might be, in getting out with more products. But for now, I don't know anything else than that's what's going on.
So tell us about the Grante, because this was I remember reading a couple of stories about it that others had over in Europe who had had the chance to taste it had written, and this is an interesting combination you came up with several different types of green tea, infusing them into barrels, right?
Yes, yeah. So this one is an idea that I got when I was in Japan, and I really like green tea. I've always been drinking tea of all kinds, and green tea especially. And when I was in Japan in 2013, I realized that green tea was something completely different from, quality-wise, from what I've had before. And it struck me that it really has a resemblance with whiskey. The complexity and the aromatics and the spices and all that stuff. It was very much like whiskey, but of course not whiskey. So I thought, I must try to do this, to put these two together. So I got home to Sweden. I met a lovely lady called Yoko Ono, which is a young Japanese lady who lives in Sweden and is married to a Swedish guy. And she is of tea grower descendants, and she imports this fantastic tea. So I made this small test cask, as I often do, which is like 30-liter casks that we use for private consumption. Otherwise, people buy them, but those are perfect test vessels. And I macerated 4 different tea leaves that I got from Yoko, and I macerated them not in whiskey but in pure spirit, and then I seasoned the casks, the 30-liter casks, with that, and the result, well, of course, then I put on whiskey that was already matured. And after 6 months, the result was astonishing. So I then decided to make a seasonal whiskey out of it. So I bought more green leaves, 4 different kinds that we tested, and then we redid the process with it, but in bigger casks. They've been lying in quarter casks, 128 liters. And then put the whiskey in after the casks were seasoned, and then maybe I thought it would be ready a bit earlier, but it was 19 months when I decided it was perfect. So the whiskey, the tea finished whiskey, was in the tea casks for 19 months. And what else can I tell? The teas that I've been using are vintage leaves from 2017, and the most beautiful ones that came out was the Yame Sencha tea. So Yame is the region of the Sencha tea, and that was fantastic. That was really, really flowery and delicate and complex. And the second one that is perhaps the one that gives most character to the whiskey is the Hojicha tea. And if you have tried Hojicha tea, it's like slightly say nutty kind of style. It's roasted, toasted, so they use more stems than leaves. It's a bit browner, and it has a wonderful flavor to it. And if you buy the simple one, it's nice. I mean, it's a nice tea to drink. But if you buy the really beautiful ones, they are astonishing. They're really, really wonderful. And then we had matcha tea, which most people have tried, and gyokuro, which is another really fine green tea, a bit more herbal in the aromatics. So those were the four, and I didn't know if I could blend them when I did them. I just did them because I thought they were beautiful. And then in the end, when I blended it all, the Sencha tea was the one that I thought was amazing. So I used most of those casks, and the Hojicha I used a bit less, but still more than the other two. And about 50% of the casks used in this bottling were tea casks. So the rest were Swedish oak, American oak, and Oloroso.
Peter, I think you had a question.
Yeah, I'm really interested in tea. We've actually done a black tea gin in-house here. And I'm just curious, what I've noticed about tea, about black tea anyway, is that it distills and it reacts with alcohol very differently to how it reacts with water. So if you make a black tea and then you say distill a black tea, they taste completely different. Did you find that with the green teas, that they were completely different when they were tasting them via alcohol as opposed to via water?
No, we didn't do any other process than macerate them. So I don't know what process you have been taking the teas in, but we have used pure spirit, macerated it, not super strong, and then actually we diluted it with Oloroso in the end instead of water to add some more character.
That's lovely.
Yeah,
that's really good.
No, I think, I don't know. No, I think they were pretty similar in the end for us.
Okay, it's great innovation. It's fantastic. I'm dying to try it now after your chat.
Maybe we can. I think there might be a bottle or two on Ireland. I'm sure.
I'll track one down. I will track.
Well, actually, we have a last year we started a web page at a web shop. Sorry. So we sell whiskey on the web shop to many countries, especially in Europe, some countries in Asia as well. Unfortunately, not to America yet. So I think Ireland is pretty easy to go on to that and order a bottle.
Good. I have my credit card with me here, so I will do that.
Good.
I have a question from Whiskey Girl 6. Which size of cask brought out most of the green tea spices? Did you use the same size for all of them, or were there different sizes?
Yeah. So we used the 30-liter casks when we started, and that is of course like it's like a racing car. Everything is really fast and a lot. But the 128 liters were the ones those are the quarter casks that we use a lot. anyway at Mackmyra. But I would say they were all pretty similar, but the Senchati and the Hojicha were the most beautiful ones. And perhaps the tannins could be sensed a bit more in the Gyokuro and Matcha and the other two.
And a question from John Kalinowski. How well does the whiskey accept the tannic notes from the tea?
Say again?
How well does the whiskey accept the tannic notes that are present in the tea?
Well, I think you have to decide that for yourself.
Fair enough.
I think they are they go together well. I like them because they are different. It's not the same. It's like tannins, yes, but different. I like what they contribute to the whiskey with, but you have to decide that for yourself if you like that.
Peter, we had a question for you, or a commentary from Omar Fitzel down in Cork. I'm sure. You ever leave the distillery?
Oh, no. Yeah, sometimes I do. Yeah, sometimes. Not very often, but sometimes. Yeah, I have a camp bed behind that door.
And there was also a question here for you that once from Graham Fraser, who wants to know if you will ever produce pot still whiskey. Please.
I'm not quite sure if Graham is stirring the pot, as we say in Ireland. Pot still whiskey, yeah, that's one of my hobby horses. Again, if anyone knows my writing or my blogs, yes. What we do here, our kind of our USP as a distillery is that's kind of all we do. We do pot still whiskey the way it used to be made prior to the 2014 technical file, which lays out legally how you're allowed to make it nowadays, which has no bearing in history. It's just how one company happened to make it, funnily enough. No, we make it a different kind of way, so we're not quite sure how that's going to work when it comes to labeling it and selling it. We do also produce pot still whiskey that's compliant with the technical file, but 90% of what we do here is not compliant. And why do we do it? Because it's bloody tasty. I mean, I do think and oats is Ireland's gift to the whiskey world, and oats is something we embrace here. And our typical mash bill would contain 15% to 20% oats, also rye, also wheat, as well as barley and unmalted barley. So they're the kind of the 5 things that we tend to use in most of our mash bills. But yes, we are making pot still, and we will continue to make pot still until we change the technical file, and then we'll make some more.
So how do you put it on the market if it doesn't comply with the technical file?
Well, it doesn't comply with the technical file for pot still Irish whiskey. It does comply with the technical file for Irish whiskey. So what happens in 18 months to 2 years' time when we bottle, I'll tell you in about 18 months to 2 years' time. Right now, I have no idea what we're even going to call the stuff. All I know is that it tastes really, really nice. And, you know, a bit like what Angela does, we also use small casks. Because if you think about it, the whiskeys we're making haven't been made in 60, 70 years, but some of them haven't been made for a couple of 100 years. So how they interact with wood, we spent the first year kind of playing with that. So we had a program of quarter casks of different kinds, and we do a mash bill. We did 100 mash bills in a year, that's what we spent the first year doing, which is sort of, I call it a year of R&D. We had to kind of reinvent how we were making whiskey. We had to kind of slow the process down. Our typical fermentation here now is about 110, 120 hours. So it's quite long. So that obviously impacts on everything in the building because it all backs up. So we spent the first year kind of unpicking everything. But quarter casks are important because anything we'd put into a quarter cask just to get a sense of where it was going to go. It's like accelerated aging, but you do get a sense after 3-6 months what casks are going to work and what casks really don't work. And that helped us then plan 2020, which is our first sort of full year of commercial production. which again has now been impacted by COVID. So we're producing less than we thought we'd be producing, but we're keeping ourselves safe, and we've broken ourselves into different teams, and we're running things, we're trying to be intelligent and clever about it. So that's a long way of answering your question, but yes, we are making pot still whiskey, and I hope to be able to bring it to market at slightly over 3 years, because we don't have any backer. We are completely independent. We've built this business up over the past 6 years just on what we sell out the door, and that's mostly gin. We are now diversifying into things like a bonded whiskey, but the lights have to be kept on, and we've 9 people to pay. So every month I need to make sure that we make some money.
You pay most of the bills most of the time.
We pay people most of the time, and sometimes we pay them with gin. Don't tell anyone that.
And I know you're probably not going to want to answer this one, but Whiskey Canuck wants to know if you can say where you're sourcing for the velvet cap.
Yeah, of course I can. Yeah, I mean we're as transparent as we can be on everything. I can't tell you because of an NDA where the 17-year-old malt came from, but if I tell you it's a double distilled Irish malt, you can probably work that out yourself. This is Great Northern, so there is a connection between these two. Great Northern is a wonderful distillery. It's fantastic, and they're lovely people. They produce really good whiskey, particularly their grain whiskey is fabulous. So we've used 50% grain, 50% malt in this blend. The grain is a wonderful sort of tropical banana, fantastic spine to the whiskey. And unusually for a grain, this is 3 to 4 years old, it's really quite drinkable, helped by the fact that quite a few of the casks were stout casks. So it's a mixture of bourbon, stouted rye, so that's ex-rye casks that we would age stout in for 3 to 6 months. And then we'd marry the blend 50-50 malt and grain, and then when it's mixed and blended, put it into barrels, into those stout barrels for another 3 to 6 months. And then we use port as well, because again, if you go on my blog, you will see that the company in question who set this brand up, Thomas Power and Company, nothing to the Powers in Dublin, Power is a common name, they were importers, and they imported a lot of port, huge amount of port. The company records are fractured and they're not whole, so we can work out exactly what they were aging their whiskey in. But I do know, and again, it's on the blog, that in Ireland during the 40s and 50s in particular, it didn't really matter what barrel you had as long as you had a barrel, because the war had just finished and there was a lack of barrels everywhere. But it's interesting that bourbon wood in Ireland doesn't really come into play until after the Second World War, 1950. So prior to that, you're talking about pot still Irish whiskey traditionally made with 15-20% oats and rye being matured for all of its life in sherry wood. That was the standard here. So that's quite an aggressive whiskey, and I'm not quite sure how the modern palate would cope with that. We are trying some of that in the building. We are trying total 100% sherry maturation of those kind of whiskies. They're very, very pungent. I mean, they face.
We'll give it a try.
But I'm sure you'll give it a try.
Take a chance on it. Now, this is, if I'm remembering correctly, this is one of the first whiskeys that's come out that acknowledges that it has Great Northern spirit in it. I mean, it's only been maybe 5-6 years since John Teeling opened up Great Northern. So I think this is one of the first retail bottlings that has some Great Northern spirit in it. Yeah,
you're going to see a couple. Well, you put more than a couple. You'll see quite a few coming this year, because he is now supplying the market. A lot of people are coming into the market. So my bets are most of the new blends you'll see coming on now will be from Great Northern. But their whiskey is really, really good, I have to say. We've been there. John and I have been there many times, and it's fantastic. It's just interesting because we're small here. I mean, we do a mash, it's a half a ton. So that's what we do. Every time we turn everything on, it's a half a ton through the building. They're 20 tons. So that's the difference in scale. We're half a ton, they're 20. Oh, Jake! Jacob,
that I won't repeat.
yeah. I owe Jake a bottle of our whiskey. Jake, I have not forgotten. You're safe. Don is taking care of your whiskey for you. So.
Okay. I'm going to pose a question to you, Angela, from Joanne McInnes, because Blackwater obviously hasn't really tried to get outside of Europe yet, but Mackmyra has. How difficult is it to break into existing markets? Joanne has heard several times that North America is really difficult to get roots in. And I know Mackmyra has tried a couple of times over the years to get into the US market and to really build a foothold, and then retrenched and pulled back for supply reasons and things like that. How hard is it to get into expanding markets outside of your basic home turf in Scandinavia?
Well, I think it really depends on your story as a company. I can only talk about the Mackmyra story, and I think when we came over to Northern America the first time, I think we were not strong enough at home. So if you haven't built your base before you go out, you don't have that base to play with. And if things doesn't go well over there, it's not a big thing. You can sort of make it grow organically. But I think what we were not. I think we jumped over too fast. I think that was one of the things was for Mackmyra, and then we had like a bit of a tough economic situation in 2014, so we had to withdraw because of that. I think what happened was also that the bottlings that went over wasn't really what should I say? Economically, we didn't earn anything on selling them over the pond because the calculations weren't made really well. So I think a lot of things happened, and when we withdrew, we had learned a lot for sure. So when next time we will do this, and we have started now, it will be on a much more with much more knowledge, and not doing things like selling it too cheap just because then we're in America, we can sell it there. No, so you have to earn some money on every bottle, of course.
And you have.
So I cannot answer for the other ones, but I can say that for Mackmyra.
But you've also got to find the right importer to work with. You've got to have the right partners.
Yeah. You absolutely. You have to find, and I think for the US, the what you call it, a 3-tier system, is so complicated for us. I mean, we have, it's not at home. It's far away from home, and then you have to understand all of that, and then you have to bottle your stuff in other sizes, and you have to go through regulations. I mean, I was over in the US in February. I was over for judging at the American Craft Spirit competition, and we tried to send over some of the bottlings we wanted to compete there, and they were just turned back at the border because they were not in the system already, and therefore they were not they couldn't even compete. So lucky for me, I brought some in my suitcase.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, there are easier wins, I guess. For a small distillery, there are if you're a small distillery in Europe, one of the great things is that there are easier wins with, because in Europe, if you have a label that's compliant in Ireland, it's compliant in Sweden, compliant in Denmark.
Exactly.
And we've got a huge market here, apart from the UK, which is buggering off. But the rest of us,
it's when your new Irish labeling laws take effect in a year or two.
That's a real bummer. It goes completely against the European project. Because at the moment, I can ship this all over Europe. It's wonderful. But imagine having to have separate labels for a tiny market like Ireland. And if you're a small producer like we are, that's a real pain in the hole, and that's going to hit us hard. So yeah, we're not happy about that. But if you ignore all that madness, yeah, in theory, the same label will work all across the EU, and you've got several 100 million people there who are dying to try your product. So yeah, it's an easier way, and America's tough.
And the system makes it look like a picnic, right, Angela?
I don't hear you. Sometimes your voice goes away.
The U.S. system over here with our 3-tier system and 50 different state systems makes the system Bellagio look like a picnic. Right?
Yeah, incredibly enough, yes.
We have a question for you also from Graham Fraser. What flavors does Swedish oak impart to a whiskey? You mentioned Swedish oak when we were talking about the Grate and your other new release. So what does Swedish oak impart? And then when you add the juniper smoking in that I know you do with some of your barley to dry it with juniper smoke, what does that add in?
If you have a new Swedish oak, it's like a very male type of aromatics, I would say. It's not as sweet. Talking like this, but it's like very tough in the aromatics. And if you would open a cigar box, you would sense a lot of lovely tobacco tones and herbal tones and spice that comes from, really lovely, what do you call them, sandalwood and perhaps even some cedar wood and black pepper, white pepper, ginger, cinnamon. So a bit like a cigar box, I would say, and very rich and intriguing. Yes.
Okay. We have a question for you now, Peter, from Chris Ratcliffe, about the transparency push and the use of blockchain working out at your shop. What benefits do you think will ultimately reach the drinkers besides being able to authenticate their whiskeys, I think?
I think it's particularly important with Irish whiskey because there are so many brands and there's so few producers. And often the romance copy on the back of a bottle kind of takes over where the truth should be. I think it's important for producers to let the consumer know that they are producers, and if so, to be as transparent as possible about how they do it and what they do. I mean, there are merchant brands out there in Ireland that you can buy and you wouldn't know they were a merchant brand unless you were in the industry. I think that's wrong. I think if you want to be a producer, you need to be honest with your consumers, particularly if you are, in our case, you're quite small, so your price point will be higher. So what's the added advantage of buying my whiskey? Well, if I can tell you visually, this is the barley we use, this is the oats we use, this is what they were grown, this is how we distill them, and you give everyone, you can give them like a book of evidence, then that's part of your story. But also, I think what's interesting from the point of view of narrative is other things that are happening in the world, like people buy bottles of whiskey from their year of birth or whatever, because we all want to touch something. I've got a bottle of, it's Highland Park from the mid-70s, which I've been drinking for the past 20 years. Because the year it was made, that particular summer holiday, I remember really well. I was with my parents in Galway, and the barley was growing in the field in Scotland as I was having my, it's that kind of intangible, touching history that I think we can tap into. And I think the best way to do that is just to be completely honest with your consumers. I mean, why wouldn't you be honest? People say, oh, Blackwater, you're radical. But we're just telling the truth. And if you're in a business where telling the truth is radical, then maybe the business needs to change. So instead of pointing fingers at people and going, you're the bad guy, we want to lead by example in the way that Waterford, our neighbors, are leading by example in one direction. We want to lead the other direction in the sense of not so much grain terroir, but masses of grain and using different mash bills, how that impacts on flavor. So that's our DNA really, is being transparent and being honest and being innovative, and we need to get that across to consumers.
So what's your take on Waterford and the 40 different farms? We had Mark Rainier on the show last Wednesday time.
Yeah, I've been there with Ned, who's their distiller, and John and I, our distiller. We spent plenty of time down there, and we've drunk our way through their catalog. It's fascinating. I'm in no doubt at all about what they're trying to prove. I know some of the other players have their doubts because their business model is based on a different project, and if Waterford are proved correct, then by default they're incorrect. There's the beginning of a debate in Ireland now about what constitutes an Irish whiskey and does it have to contain Irish grain, and so on and so forth. But at least we're talking about it now. At least things have moved on in the past decade from the point in time where there was one or two brands and no one knew anything. At least now we are talking and we're engaging, and that's what I've been always trying to do with the various books I've written on Irish whiskey, is just to get people engaged and thinking. Just think before you buy.
And Distilled Whiskey points out, I hope you remember my I know you were running a promotion on the website, bottles or whatever. You got a copy of your book, The Whiskey.
Like my past is catching up with me here.
So, question from Joanne McInnes. Most children do not grow up saying, I want to be a whiskey maker. So how did the two of you come to be whiskey makers? Peter, I know your background is like mine in broadcast and journalism.
Yeah.
But, Angela, let's start with you. What got you into this in the first place?
Well, I think it's a combination of banana shells and the passion for good things in life. Looking back, I think it was obvious that I was going to become a whiskey maker, but I didn't know that. I think working in the restaurant business when I was younger, I was serving, I was a waitress, and then I moved to Italy and I learned the good things in life. Good wine and food and all that stuff. And then I moved back to Sweden and I did the sommelier training. And I think my whiskey nerves started to wake up then. And then I just happened to help a friend at one of the fairs in Sweden. And some of the Glenmorangie guys came along and thought, a lady that knows about whiskey, and there the ball started rolling. And I can't really say, I think I didn't even understand that I was going to make whiskey. When I was starting working with Mackmyra, I was like, okay, I can work with Mackmyra. I can do tastings. I can taste all their casks and, I can have fun. And then when my boss said, would you like to blend the whiskey? I was like, oh, you really think I could do that? And then I was the only person in the company that knew how whiskey was, like sensory wise. So and certainly, I did a lot of mistakes in the beginning and things like that. But I had a lot of friends in the business. I had my mentor, Jim McEwan, Bruchladi, Ben at Bowmore initially, and other noses and people. So I think I've been, I don't know, lucky and yeah. I can't answer that question. Okay. It happened to become like that, and here I am.
Peter?
Oh, many twists and turns in life. You think you're going to go here and you end up there. My background is a TV producer. So I spent 20 years making programs with the BBC in the UK. Most of them were kind of food and drink or travel programs. So the travel was interesting because we traveled to vineyards in Italy and Spain and France and Food programs are great because you end up working with amazing chefs and getting turned on by what they do. So there was that part, but there wasn't. I didn't realize until just before my father's death, actually, that he and my mother had met while he was working in a brewery in Waterford City, Kylie's Brewery, which is long gone, and I had no idea. And my uncle Peter, who I'm named after, is the former brewer from Budweiser and Anheuser-Busch in St. Louis. So that's my uncle. So we have beer in the family, which I wasn't aware of, and then I had just being engaged with professionals from the trade via my work in television. And I think through journalism, I got involved in writing, and then writing about whiskey became a natural. And then I wrote about whiskey, and before I knew it, I was saying to my wife, why don't we set up a distillery? Why don't I leave my job, and why don't we do this in 2014 in the middle of a recession? There you go.
Oh, that must have gone over really well.
That went down like a lead balloon. No, to be fair, she was great. And she's still my wife, so it worked out okay.
Knowing what TV producers get paid, she was waiting for you to cash in on the distillery, I'm sure. And knowing a bunch of TV producers over the years and having been one, how did you decide on a whiskey without changing your mind 14 times?
How do you know I didn't change my mind 15 times? I'm always changing my bloody mind.
I'm kidding. Great question here from Chris Ratcliffe. If equipment and money were not an issue, what sort of whiskey would you love to make, or what techniques would you like to explore?
Good question.
So what would the two of you like to try out that you haven't done yet?
Well, I would love to do rye whiskey. I'm a sucker for rye whiskey, and that would be a dream of mine. Yes, definitely.
It's very messy. Did you get the sample of rye whiskey?
Which I got the sample of your new make along with the velvet cap.
Yeah. Well, we have an ongoing, Angela, we have an ongoing R&D rye project, which is breaking our hearts because it's tough.
I've heard.
But it's lovely. It's really lovely. We sent out with the little samples of velvet cap. We sent out a small bottle of new make rye. That rye is probably a couple of months old. And what we do here is when we do something, we try to make it better every time. So the rye we're making now, and we cleaned the mash tun today, which was repulsive after a couple of weeks of rye. And we're doing the final spirit runs this week. That'll be the end of the rye program for 2020. So yeah, what I do is I do what we're doing now, and I do it in a bigger scale, and I do it differently. Having done this now for a year, the equipment we have struggles with things like rye and lots of oats, and struggles with that way of making whiskey, which is not really the way it's made nowadays. So I would change, particularly the mash end of stuff. I would change that radically. But the stills we have are fantastic, but the mashing end is a problem.
Let's give this a try, just because I had to reach. And as Chris points out, Swedes and rye, a great combo, Angela. I think it would be great just because they grow rye in Sweden, right? Got it.
Oh yeah,
definitely, yes. We have friend company in we have many friends who makes good whiskeys in Sweden and in Finland, but there's a Finnish company that you might have heard of, Kyre, who makes really lovely rye. They make other stuff as well, and their rye whiskey is really nice.
And some very good Danish rye whiskey available as well.
Yeah, the Stauning guys make some really good stuff.
Make really lovely whiskies. Yeah, and there's Kilbeggan did an Irish rye. I was 30-odd% rye. The new make you have there is 51, between 51 and 55. It's a vatting, so we were trying to dial it in a little bit. The rest then would be unpeated malt and 5% unmalted barley and 5% peated malt, just at the back of it. That's what you're nosing now.
And Graham, why is rye so difficult to mash? And I think I know the reason, but you two are closer to the stills than I am, so go for it. Why is it more difficult to mash?
The problem is when you use a traditional sort of lauter tun, the idea is the water trickles down through the grain bed. That works fine if you're using barley or even 15-20% of oats. It'll still trickle down. When you put rye in, rye kind of goes to a gloop, and the water doesn't trickle in, kind of sits there. When you're getting above about 25-30% rye, you can easily get a stuck mash. I mean, we've had them here and they're a nightmare. So what we do now is, luckily the part of the world we're in here is famous for growing oats. One of the biggest porridge companies in Ireland is in Dungarvan down the road from us here. So we get oat hulls from Flahavans, and we use the oat hulls, not the oats, but we use them as kind of like roughage. So you put about 10% oat hulls in. That's just enough to keep the air passages open so that the rye doesn't just coagulate. So the water will go through the oat hulls. That's the only way we can do it with our technology. If you've got something more sophisticated, like they have strangely in Waterford, is the only one in Ireland, which is like a big metal tea bag, and you basically squeeze. I forgot what it's called now. We haven't got one of those. Yeah, that's what we really need to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, the late great Dave Pickerel always used to refer to rye as the brat of grains, just because when you get it wet, it sort of turns into, if you look at oatmeal after it's sat for a while, and it just turns like solid and like a hockey puck almost. If you let oatmeal hit the bowl, that's sort of what it winds up doing in the mash tuns, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then when it comes out, when you're basically draining the wash off, and you put your finger in, it's kind of like almost like the consistency of a runny treacle. It'll kind of coat your finger like a lot like honey or treacle. It's still quite liquid, and then it sticks to everything. So it sticks to your mash tuns completely wrecked. The wash still it's awful. It's a nightmare. So you've got to do heavy cleaning. Spirit still's not too bad, but we've got our yields up pretty good now. I think, as John would say, we have it dialed in, but it has broken our hearts.
This is pretty good. It's down to 46%.
Yeah.
On the sample, but it's got some good spice to it. Nice balance.
Yeah, I mean, that's, as I said, we call it the R&D project, because what you have isn't what we're going to sell. It's on our way to somewhere else. We're getting there. I think by next year, by 2021, we'll have it probably done.
And we have a question.
I'm very jealous of you, Mark.
Sorry, go ahead.
I said I'm very jealous. I would like to try that as well.
I'll have to send you some, Angela.
Thank you.
I'll send you the better stuff.
Ooh. For you now from Whiskey Canuck, how has the Swedish whiskey consumer market changed in recent years? Is it still Scotch dominated, or are you seeing more of the inroads for your whiskeys and the other Swedish distilleries that have opened up? Have you been able to make a big inroads into the market locally?
Well, I think it's still a big Scotch market, of course, but I think first of all, the Japanese took a big piece of the cake. I'd say 10-15 years ago, they started to come in seriously. And after that, I think the new world whiskey has come a long way too. So Australia, but a lot of bourbon and rye and I think Irish as well. Teeling has come into Sweden, and of course the guys that were already here. But I don't know the figures, but I think world whiskey is definitely for the whiskey aficionados. I think world whiskey is more trendy and more new and has more news for them. Whilst if you like the Scotch whiskey, you like the tradition and you like what it already has. So My guess is that Scotch is strong, but the New World whiskey is definitely coming along. And regarding the Swedish distilleries, yes, we have competition. We have good colleagues. We have some good distilleries working in Sweden. Really good stuff going on. We have Wien, which is I think Wien is being sold in the U.S.
I haven't seen that one yet.
No. I think Henrik Molin, he has been traveling a lot. I think he's going over a lot with American Distilling Institute for their speeches and workshops and stuff. Anyway, his stuff is really good. And you have former Box, but now High Coast, and you have Smögen, and you have then you have some of them that they haven't come out with products yet. But Tevsjö, I think they have something out. And who else? Norrtälje, which makes an ecological whiskey sometimes, but they do more schnapps and aquavit regularly. And then you have Gammelstilla, which is not too far away from Mackmyra. And Gotland whiskey, and I think up in Lapland you have something as well. So things are happening. We're not working together in Sweden. We're still a too young whiskey nation. It's still like they're mine. These customers are mine. Don't come too close. Yeah. Kind of feeling between us, I think. Even though when we meet, we're nice to each other. But I think in a few years there might be some more cooperations. I hope so, certainly.
It would be nice to see a Swedish whiskey trail at some point.
Yes. I think there has been someone has already created a Swedish whiskey trail on their webpage somewhere. But if I get the question sometimes, is there a Swedish taste to the whiskey? Is there like something typical for Swedish whiskey? And I would say for now, no. I think most of us in Sweden, most of the guys are doing more the Scotch type of whiskey. I think Henrik at Wien, he's doing very much something else. His whiskey is something else. He has his own style. And Mackmyra, we're doing more like, with Swedish raw material and something like we invent ourselves. Maybe they would answer differently if you ask the other guys. But generally, I would say it's, I think we need some more years before we have like an agreement on, this would be the Swedish touch that we decide on together.
I have something like that. Do you take part in the Cinderella whiskey cruises out of Stockholm?
I've done that a couple of times, but the last time I did that, I think that was like 5 years ago or so. Yeah, and it's mostly people are there because they want to meet the Scottish guys. So, so I was like, "Hello, where are you?"
Well, for anybody who isn't familiar with this, it's something the Viking Line does during usually February, I think, where they run these cruises to nowhere out of Stockholm that go into international waters, and then it turns into a world-class duty-free market. You've got people grocery carts on wheels up and down buying whiskeys and pulling them off, and because of the way the Swedish government regulates whiskey sales, as soon as they get into international waters, all hell breaks loose for about 3 or 4 days on these cruises. And it's one of these things, I've got to try this I've got to go on just once.
You have to wait until the pandemic is over.
Yeah. Also, Dave Worthington, our pal, wants to know where your hat is tonight, Angela.
Well, I had my hair differently, so that hat doesn't go well with this hairdo, Dave.
Okay. Peter, tell us about the book, The Whiskies of Ireland, because that sort of has become one of my go-to reference sources.
Yeah.
It's it's only been out for a year or so, and it's already dated in terms of some of the distilleries now. But that's the way it would be for anybody pretty much writing about Irish whiskey these days.
It's funny, the first book I wrote was probably 20 years ago, and there was so little happening. We could publish a book and put tasting notes in the book, and they wouldn't go out of date. And I remember that book being remaindered about 6 years later. And then the last version of the Whiskies of Ireland came out a couple of years ago, and it instantly went to second print run. So there's been a huge change in attitude. I don't write anymore about Irish whiskey. Thank you, Dave. I keep saying you can't be a jockey and a commentator. It's not right. It's not fair. You can't be independent if you have skin in the game, like I now have. I still have a blog on the website, or I can have my opinions, but I don't ask anyone to pay for those opinions. They're free. The book itself is a good primer because the first section is just history, so that's not going to change. And the second part is kind of process, and that really doesn't change either. And there's a very little slim bit at the back giving the story so far. But I think we were the 21st whiskey distillery to commence production in Ireland. And I think that's 18 months ago, there are now 31. And for most of my life, there was one or two. So there's been a huge change. It's important to say too, if you look at the sales figures, this is still the Jameson whiskey boom. This is not the Irish whiskey boom at all. It is the Jameson boom, and everyone else has got a very small part of the market. So for me, Irish whiskey is still a very boring category. I think it'll become interesting in the next 3 years when more of the small producers have their own liquid in the market. And then we can really talk about the Irish whiskey industry. I think it's actually too early. And even though we've got a huge history of making whiskey here, I think we're very like Sweden. I think it's too early to say what Irish whiskey really is. Because until now, what we say Irish whiskey is a brand proposition. It is not a category proposition. And I think it's going to take us a while to get to that stage of maturity. We're not there yet.
So how do you compete with a monolith like Jameson?
You don't. You can't. You'd be wiped out. They're not making the stuff we're making because they're frightened of it. We're making it because we're frightened of them. No, we're making it because we can't. We're not a big box distillery. We can never be up in Costco. We're not. It's not going to happen because we're tiny. So we have to have a different story. We're not selling units of alcohol here. That's not what we do. We're selling something else: narrative, story, history, passion, flavor, taste. All those kind of things are what we're trying to get our heads around, in the same way that you guys are in Sweden. And you've got to play a different game. If they set the rules, and they do, then the rules are set to their benefit. That's how power works. That's exactly how it works. Rules aren't about what's right and what's wrong. Rules are about who has power and how they want to implement that power. So if I play by their rules, they're going to win. So I can't play by their rules. It's not possible. So we don't.
Good question, Fraser. What are the best whiskeys you've ever tried? And I'm going to add a caveat here. They can't be your whiskeys. Best whiskeys you've ever tried from somebody else.
Angela, go for it. You're the nose, I'm not.
Oh, I'd say, I have so many best whiskeys. But I think, oh God, do I really have to say?
One.
Excuse me?
The most recent one, then.
The most recent, really good one. All right. Oh God. Can't you start first? I can think a bit more.
Okay, I'll tell you. I'm a big fan of Springbank. And in the past, I've forgotten how long it was now, I had some money before I started being a distiller. I had money as a TV producer, and I was living in Scotland. So it was very handy because you had eye contact. And I still remember 1966 local barley Springbank.
Oh, I remember that one too.
Oh,
I remember that one too. Yes.
yeah.
We
That's
used
still
to
my
have
high
that
point.
at Accurate when I worked there. That was fantastic. I agree on that.
We have a comment from Bill Ricker that plain entry-level Jameson should be tossed at the tonsils or diluted with coffee. Their better expressions are quite sippable. We should point out they do have a Jameson cold brew expression now that is diluted with coffee. So you can try that one. And as Dave Kuhn points out, people I know don't drink Jameson. They shoot it, so they don't even really know what it tastes like. And it doesn't taste that bad. It's not bad as whiskeys go.
No, it's okay. I've been drinking some good Jameson throughout the years.
The Jameson Bow Street is really good. The new the Bow Street 18-year-old is really good. And Dave Kuhn points out a 23-year-old Brook Laddie pulled right from a hoggy in the warehouse was probably the best whiskey I've ever had. I've heard the Springbank warehouse tour is crazy, like they'll pull casks for you. I gotta take that tour.
Oh yes, now I can think of a recent really good one.
Okay.
I had that was not mine, and it was a Kilchoman. It was my own cask that I bought together with some guys. We actually bought it when they started, but then they had that fire, so we couldn't have it until the year after. So I think it was 2006, and we bottled it 2 years ago. And
wow,
I think it was absolutely amazing. It was it's the richest sweetness together with that beautiful, so very balanced smokiness that was amazing. And I mean, I think we were 5 on that cask, and we bought it together. It was the old whiskey club I used to take care of, Accurate, and we bottled it, and we had quite some bottles each. And I sold most of my bottles to friends of mine, and they still come back and rave about how fantastic that was. And that's really one of the nicest I've had.
Dave Kuhn wants to know what percentage you bottled that one at. Cask-Strength?
Could it have been? It was around 50.
Okay.
Around 50, yeah.
Well, we have gone on for about a little over an hour now, and want to give you a chance to just final thoughts from either of you. Where do you think we're going to wind up a year from now, given COVID-19, given all the stuff that's going on in this world? What do you think we're going to be doing a year from now?
Well, I think some of the producers maybe won't make it. I hope everybody will make it, but I don't think everybody. There's going to be a lot of change in society, and also for the whiskey industry, I think. Maybe if you can do what we've done, like some hand sanitizers to help your business going. Meanwhile, maybe that could be a business for someone to continue with. Who knows? It's not as sexy though, but if it makes you survive, why not? You can have it on the side while you do whiskey, and you can earn some money on that stuff. Could be your bread and butter, so to say. But I think there will be a lot of change, definitely in all sectors. Yeah, well, I think initially it will look like we will go back to what we had before, but there will be a lot of changes for sure, because the pandemic won't end, even though we would like it to end. So, well, I can't say more than that, but I think for myself, certainly, I have been working at home, and it have been quite good. I've been forced to not travel as much as I do usually, And I love to travel. I really love to travel. I really, really do. And so it has brought me sort of back to basics. And I've been, thinking a lot about my life and things. So I know I will make some changes. I don't know exactly what yet, but I think a lot of people are thinking like that. And there has been horrible things with this pandemic, but also some really good things, I think, for people. I know that for me and for some of my friends and colleagues. So we'll see.
Peter?
Yeah, it's interesting times that we're living in. I think in Ireland, you're going to find that there'll be a pause now on development because everyone's hoarding their cash. And financiers are just kind of being cautious. Maybe not a bad thing. The distilleries that started up over the past 3-4 years, I would imagine you'll see gin brands going, definitely. Possibly even some gin distilleries. I just see one opening. They're opening all the time still. You kind of wonder, is it too late? I think we probably passed the bubble. So then how do you keep the lights on? How do you run the business? How do you fill that pipeline for 3+ years? Now we're halfway through it, and it's tough. We're okay, but that's because we've got a very good grip on the Irish market. So I don't know. I kind of hope everyone will survive because we're beginning to coalesce. It's a bit like in Sweden. There is the beginnings of cooperation between the various distilleries, particularly whiskey more than gin. Gin is still, it's mine, go away. Whereas whiskey's a little bit bigger. So I would hope that we will help each other through this. But really, I was talking to a manufacturer of stills in the recent past, and they were saying, look, it's a good time to look for second-hand equipment in about 18 months.
Yeah,
and that's across Europe. So Ireland is not immune to that.
Yeah, I am not that we're going to get through this in the distilling industry, in the bar industry, restaurants. We don't know what the lack of on-premise sales and the decimation of the on-premise market is going to do for brands all over the place, because a lot of brands depended on those on-premise sales to get people to try their stuff. And if you lose that, I don't know where we go. I hope that all of the distilleries that are around now survive. I fear that many won't, but we've gone through bad times before, and we've always managed to come back as an industry.
True. I think the difference this time, though, is that cash is a finite quantity.
Yeah.
And unless you've got backers who are willing to sign you a very big check, we don't know how long this will go on for. Now we've been fortunate the way things have fallen. We were always much stronger in the off trade than in the on trade. The off trade is still fine in Ireland. It's kind of ways stronger because there's no on trade, there's no pubs anymore. So it's kind of working slightly to our advantage. But now it's if you can't sell your product, you're not going to earn any money, but you're still spending money. Even if you furlough your staff, you still have costs. So yeah, I really don't know what's going to happen. I really don't know.
Well, we'll have to.
On a happy note.
Yeah, we'll have to get together a year from now and see how things wound up, guys. Thank you again for joining us. Hang on just a second here, and I will say our goodbyes for tonight. I want to thank Peter Mulryan from Ireland's Blackwater Distillery, Angela Forsgren D'Orazio from the Mackmyra Distillery in Sweden, one of the most beautiful distilleries out in the middle of a bunch of birch trees in the middle of the Swedish countryside, and a warehouse that's located in a mine that you drive down a loading ramp to get into that's just absolutely stunning. If you ever get the chance to visit Sweden, I heartily encourage you to try to visit Mackmyra when we're able to travel once again. That's going to do it for this Whiskey Wednesday webcast. I hope you'll join us on Friday, our Whiskey Fellowship webcast this week. We will have another writers panel. Clay Whitaker will join us this time. He was scheduled to join us a couple of weeks ago, but the power went out just before the show at his place in Charlotte, and he wasn't able to join us. Brad Jaffe will join us, and Yolanda Evans, a freelance whiskey writer out of Europe, will join us as well. That's at 5 p.m. New York time, Friday afternoon, 10 p.m. London time, 2100 GMT. Don't forget to join us this weekend for WhiskyCast. We will have part 2 of our visit to the Gladfield Malt maltings in New Zealand, along with the announcement of the next Whiskey Club of the Month for June, and a lot of other whiskey news and everything else that's going on. Take care of yourselves.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Peter. It was lovely meeting you.
Nice meeting you.
Yes, nice meeting you too.
Bye. Good night, everyone.
Lots of love to everybody. Bye.
Thank you.